Good morning and welcome to the Journey of Grief, Becoming Us Without Them, where we try to provide resources for people who are grieving all kinds of losses. And today I've invited Suzanne Kiesz to talk to us about her work as it relates to grief. And Suzanne, how about if you introduce yourself and tell us what you want us to know?
Good morning, Barbara, and thank you for inviting me to talk about a population that I have a lot of passion for. My name is Suzanne Kiesz, and I am a licensed clinical social worker. And I am in private practice in the city of Elk Grove. My practice is I began with individual adults, and then I was drawn to kids and teens. And so, probably 50% of my practice is kids and teens, and they just have my heart and my passion right now, especially in this area of loss and the grieving process.
That's great because not everybody feels confident working with those folks.
Well, Barbara, let me share with you where my passion for kids and teens comes from. Is in my life, I started out as being one of those kiddos who came from a family where there were early life problems that affected me in terms of losses and grief. And so, in my journey in life, I have encountered beautiful people, teachers and neighbors and mothers of best friends and all kinds of people in my life that poured into me at different times when I needed it and helped me into my journey of healing. And so when I was in college, I was captivated with the field of psychology to understand why life affects people in the way that they do and understanding about the concept of resilience. And it was later in my work, as a child support officer, I thought there's got to be something more. I want to help kids and families more. And so I was captivated with the field of social work. And so I obtained my master's degree and I entered the field of child welfare. And that is where I spent 23 years of my career before I retired. And so a lot of my work experience and my heart is with children who have experienced all kinds of difficulties in life. And they have had so many losses that really complicates grief and makes grief very challenging to work with for kids in foster care. And then my area of expertise also is in the adoption world, helping that child when they cannot go home to be able to grieve some of the losses so that their hearts can open to accepting and being included in new families and having hopefully a good life. Presently in my practice, I am treating children who have had a foster care experience and have that adoption experience because the story of loss doesn't end at an adoption. It continues to unfold into new things that affect them with a new family. And so I treat children and work with their parents in those areas as well.
That's so great because a lot of people don't really understand how much children grieve, even babies, when they've spent 9 months inside of a woman and listening to her breathing and her heart, and then they're born and that's all gone, they like grieve. Where did she go? They wait and wait and wait.
Yeah.
And it can really affect their ability to bond. Then if they go to a foster parent and then finally an adoptive parent, that just can screw up that ability to bond. And then if they're older and they've been in turmoil and now they get plopped into a new family and everybody's awkward and trying really hard, I can't imagine how much there is for kids to work on and work with. And it's so wonderful to hear there's someone who says, you guys could use some help. Let's do this in a meaningful
Yes.
process.
And families come into this picture, and many of them are relatives that come into the picture with a good heart and wanting to help the child heal and be part of their family and have the life and things that they may have missed earlier in their childhood. But if we haven't taken the time to work with that child to really help them grieve the prior losses, sometimes that gets stuck and they're not able to be part of a new family when there is unfinished business for them.
Absolutely. That is so important. And I'm curious, how do you do that?
Well, it's a journey. In my practice, I am certified in a therapy technique called EMDR. And I love that therapy technique because it's a nice, gentle way of getting at some of those early life stuck points. And with kids, I incorporate play therapy techniques that helps that even sometimes in a fun way to be able to understand, boy, I've got some big feelings about this. And to be able to work them through the feelings in their heart, the behaviors that come out because of that, that are sometimes not working out real well for them in life, and to be able to make better sense of it so that they feel empowered to make choices and to have understanding and to be able to take care of their heart and heal so that they can open to have new relationships and enjoy the relationships they have better.
That's great. So let's just do an example. So a kid shows up, they've but their parental rights from mom have been terminated, and now they're living with mom's sister and her family. And what can mom and expect to see from these children? And then you work with them. So then in a year, two, five, what will they look like if the EMDR is successful in helping them grieve their losses and heal their trauma and integrate? So I'll start here and I'll end up here. So what is that trajectory?
Whoa, Barbara, you've asked a big question because kids who come into the foster care, they already come with losses from the time they step in the door because they've lost birth parents. Many times they've lost siblings. They've lost familiar places where they've lived. They've lost a school community. Sometimes they've lost pieces of their culture. And so the first place that I begin is understanding from the caregiver or other information sources what that child's story is up until the time I see them. And also with the child to do some preliminary work of how they view relationships. And there's activities that I do with them that can be art related or sand tray related or drawing, whatever medium I can use to help the child begin to tell the story from their perspective. And then I begin to understand the landscape. Many times in working with the child is helping their caregiver to understand the child's story. So, really, the first stop is to go over the information we have. Many times, that adoptive parent has not heard the story from beginning to present. They've gotten pieces, they know certain things, they see their child's behavior and they're wondering, what is this? Is it related to early childhood? Is it related to something that's happening in my home? And so parents are confused, and they are the first helper for their kiddos.
Right.
And so I gather information, and I have what's called the information disclosure time with them. And we get on an easel pad, and from day one, as much information we have, we go over the story. And what's beautiful in that session is the parent gets to the point where they hear and imagine, when my child comes to me from perhaps a home where they didn't have regular meals. And so my child's anxiety today, when they hoard food and they find candy wrappers under the bed, um, that's where their story begins. It makes sense. And so when parents have this aha moment, that where my child is now makes sense. And oh my goodness, I'm seeing such beautiful resilience with them and strengths. Yes, they still struggle with this, but this is doable. What can we do to support this? Once the parents on board and has a greater understanding of their child, they're more invested in helping to do the individual work that we are going to do with the kids. And many times the parent is also participating in the session with the child, because that's part of beginning as we're grieving the loss of people and places and things that they still are wrestling with. There's that parent who's there, seeing them, validating them, loving on them through that, so that we can build that new connection. And then a lot of the ways that I work with children is really based on the age of the child and what they are able to do. Sometimes it's sensory work. Sometimes it's understanding how things feel in their body. I do a lot of information and education with a caregiver and child on emotions. Um, all the emotions are normal and healthy. So even if you feel angry or scared, that's beautiful. Your body is a storyteller. It's telling you a story. And our job is to figure out, what is the story that your body is telling you, so that we know how to write the story and where that story needs to go from here. So it's really working at really intense things, but many times in just a fun and light way.
It seems like it would be so much easier for these adopting parents to go through this process with you, because a lot of times, like I remember when my kids were babies or really young and they would be sick and they couldn't tell me what was wrong. And I just would be so anxious and assume, oh, it's something terrible. And the minute the doctor said, okay, it's this and it's going to do this, I'd be like, all right. And then I would know what was happening and how to navigate it and what was expected of me. And that just, even though the kid wasn't well, at least I felt safer. So for you to be able to help these adopting parents say, oh, well, no wonder, and then not feel anxious or ashamed if they are not seeming to be effective with the kid, and then taking it out on the kid, like, what the hell is wrong with you, kid? Instead, they're able to go, well, of course they're like that. Look what they've been through. So you coaching and encouraging them helps them to stay out of their own trauma so that they can respond effectively to the kid.
Yes. And sometimes in working with their child's grief and loss, that begins to bring up grief and loss for that parent as well. So, part of the parent support and education that I do is helping them to begin to understand how their own losses and grief, many times for adopting parents who are adopting for the first time, it's the loss of being able to have their own biological kids. And sometimes that comes up. So there's support and education I do there. And sometimes a parent needs their own therapist to concurrently work on those issues. And so I do make referrals for those parents to do their work so that they can be as present as they can for what their child needs. And
It's
it's
so
just
true. Wow.
amazing how parents are just open to doing what they need to for kids. The other thing that's important for caregivers is to be able to be open to that even though the child comes from a birth parent who was for whatever reason was neglectful, not present, or abusive, that child still has a connection and sometimes love for that parent, and for them to be open to accepting what that child needs in order to be okay in working through that loss, and the grief for that is important. And so we do that kind of work as well.
So great. So this is clearly a two-part conversation. So I'm hoping I can invite you back for a part two because I
Oh,
really try to keep this to around 30 minutes. And we're getting darn close here. And
oh,
so I would love it if you could kind of let's go with young kids now. So instead of adolescents, let's try to include adolescents in the part two. So in working with very small children, if I'm either the adopting parent of a baby or a small child, or my kids are friends with a child who's going through this process, what is the best way to support kids who are going through this, even if I'm not part of the direct care bubble?
um, to be open to let the child be free to be as authentic self as they possibly can be. And many times in just normal play, some of the themes of loss will come out, and to be able to validate their feelings. Doesn't mean we agree with it, just that we acknowledge that it's there for him. Oh, I see that you've got big feelings right now that might look like perhaps anger, and helping the child connect those. So validate feelings, because kids and teens and adults, we all want to be seen. We want to feel like we're heard, and we want to feel like we're understood.
We
And
do.
so, whether it's a caregiver, whether it's a relative, whether it's a neighbor, if we can be that person in a child's life, we're going to create that space that they can feel, maybe this is safe to share more. And when kids are able to get that story out, that helps with their healing journey. And we all can be part of it in big and small ways.
So I'm the adoptive parent of this complicated young little one. And now I'm arranging play dates for my kid. So what is appropriate and effective? What do I share with the mom whose kid, I'm going to send this kid off for a play date? How much do I share? How much do I not share? How do I make sure this other mom has enough information not to wonder what the heck just happened and yet not set a negative expectation for them so they don't even want to do the play date?
hmm Well, information sharing for your child who has an early life story of abuse and neglect, that's sometimes kind of a tricky thing that a parent would need to use judgment in how much they share and to whom they share that with. So many times, adoptive parents may be able to say, my child is adopted. They have they came to us when they were older. We don't even have to use the foster care word unless you're comfortable with that parent. They came to us older, and so they're doing a lot of learning
Oh,
with us. And so, if you don't mind, as your child plays with us, is it okay if they come to our home so that we can supervise the play and help our child because they're learning some social skills right now and we want to be able to monitor it? You're welcome to come over. Also, we can have a cup of coffee, we can let the kids play. So you try to normalize it as best you can, but also putting those safeguards around your child so that they can be successful, instead of just saying, oh, you can go to the neighbor's house and their mama's going to supervise and then cross your fingers and hope that all goes well.
yeah,
Your job is to take care of your child and help that you give enough information, but that you supervise so things go well for them. And then they see, I can do this. I can have a friend and we can play. And they need to experience other pieces of life that are just normal.
for
Not
sure.
everything's trauma.
Okay, so now I'm sending them off to preschool or kindergarten. So, what are the appropriate ways to ask their teachers and caregivers for feedback? Like eh, asking, is it okay if I send my kid with this binder and you just note anything that you observe? I don't need a paragraph or a letter, just a couple lines of something you observe so I can work with that. Like, how do you get the feedback you need from the other people without saying, please stop your entire life and make copious notes about my child?
Well, you know, in this day and age, there's lots of kids who have special needs of all kinds, neurodivergent kind of special needs. And so teachers are more familiar with being observant of kids. And so I think to ask for your child for just a little bit feedback is really more acceptable in this day and age than it may have been in the past, where it kind of singles your kiddo out. Um, so I think just having a conversation, again, being careful in how much information, because that you share, because this is your child's story and you want your child them to know enough to be able to be observant and give you the feedback, and really coming with an attitude with the teacher of, I am partnering with you, so if I know these observations, then I can work with my child at home so when they come to school the next day, they've got more understanding and skills and they can be a better student in your classroom.
I imagine that would be so wonderful for them to be partnered with. A lot of people just
Yeah.
send their kids to school and say, good luck. Like, My mom was not particularly interested in us as children. And so I would get straight A's because I was really smart, but I was that evil child that nobody wanted in their class who talked and wiggled and squirmed. And I had a lot of externalizing behaviors. So they would call my mom and say, I need to talk to you about your daughter. Great. What are her grades in your class? Well, she's getting straight A's, but well, okay, here's the deal. The grades are what I'm interested in. The rest is your problem. Call me if there's a problem with the grades and hang up on them. So I could be just tearing the place up. And as long as I got straight A's, you weren't getting any help from my mom.
Oh my goodness.
So
Yeah.
for a parent to say, I'm here to partner with you and make it a joyful experience for all of us, they would be so happy.
Yes. And it's also important for those kids who feel like they need to be perfect, who get the good grades. They don't ask for anything. They're just kind of in the background. Those are observations that an adoptive parent will need to know also. It's not just the acting out kids or the kids with big emotions. It's those kids that are very quiet, stoic, sullen that need just as much support as the other kids as well. So it takes that parent, once they have that understanding and expertise about their child and attunement, that they are looking to see how can I help my child.
Yeah, that's so great. It's so neat that you help the parents create this big support bubble and not
Mhm.
just cope. And so, at the end of my videos, I always ask the people I talk to give us 1 minute wisdom. So, based on this conversation, your experiences, if there's one thing that you want people to carry out of this conversation, if they ignore everything else we talked about and they carry one thing away, what is that 1 minute wisdom that you want people to take with them from here?
So, for in working with kids, especially kids who come from foster care and adoption, they have loss in their life, just as we all loss, multiple losses, and maybe have not had the opportunity or sometimes have become stuck in a grieving process. So, my word of wisdom is for caregivers to not look at your child as what's wrong with you, to be able to understand that they have multiple losses and loss and grieving is a normal process. Look at your child from a vantage point of normal first, and then where the difficulties lie in between that, so that we avoid labeling our kids in something that they didn't create, but they are going through, to look at my child as what are their strengths, where can they be? And that makes a whole different attitude and relationship of that parent to the child. And the child then feels like my parent understands me, they see me, and they're able to accept the help and love that is given.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much. So again, it's wonderful to know there's someone who really, really focuses on these kidlets. I specialize in treating them after they've grown up and crashed and burned. So it's nice to know you're kind of preventing that crash and burn ahead of time. And I will put all your contact information in the show notes. And hopefully we can schedule a part two pretty soon.
Yes, well, thank you for inviting me, Barbara, and being able to spend a little time with you to talk about an area of practice that's just near and dear to my heart.
That is so cool. Okay, thank you very much. And I'm just gonna stop the recording now.